Hi, folks. Let's talk about California, where leadership is so busy playing politics, they can't even keep the state from going up in smoke. See, since the start of 2025, there have been more than 5,000 wildfires in the state, nearly 280,000 acres burned, 31 lives lost, and over 17,000 homes destroyed. And as we speak, the Canyon Fire, sparked in Ventura County, is ripping into Los Angeles County, forcing evacuations and scorching everything in its path. Yet Gavin Newsom's priority this week, well, it's declaring a civil war on Trump and the federal government. It's the perfect snapshot of California under one-party Democrat rule. Crisis after crisis, and the people in charge treat it like a PR strategy instead of an emergency. Now, before we get to that, folks, we have to make a pit stop at the Joy Reid podcast because she's out here making Gavin look reasonable. Well, almost.
I believe what he is saying is that the brown people who are being deported and detained by ICE, by his masked agents, are natural-born field workers. Something about them makes them natural-born field slaves. I think that's what he's saying. He's saying they're very special that way, but that the inner cities, the inner city people, which, given the fact that Trump is 79 years old and comes from a certain generation, means black people are just not doing the work. They're just not in the fields anymore. They're not, the coming into the field doesn't come naturally to them anymore.
What are you saying, dude?
So just to be clear, if you are a MAGA voter who supported Trump in order to see millions and millions of non-white migrants deported.
Are you retarded?
He just told you that the violent, militarized, masked ICE deportations that he and Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem and Tom Homan are staging on camera to entertain and appease you are temporary. He intends to bring the deportees right on back here soon, somehow, to get them to want to come back because they make the perfect nearly slave labor. They don't get a bad back. And besides, the inner cities, the blacks, they just won't pull their weight in the fields anymore.
I think it's safe to say at this point that Joy Reid is objectively retarded because this take isn't just inflammatory, folks. It's a textbook example of how the Democrat Party keeps its audience in a permanent state of outrage by inventing motives that aren't actually there. Here you have a failed cable news host from MSDNC framing immigration enforcement as some cartoonish plan to deport people only to re-import them as nearly slave labor, a claim with zero basis in policy or fact. It's meant to trigger racial guilt and cement the idea that border control is inherently racist while completely ignoring the real-world exploitation happening under the very sanctuary policies people like Joy champion, like the migrant children found working in an illegal marijuana grow here in California just a few weeks ago in her own political camp's backyard. This is a playbook, folks. Deflect from actual abuses, reframe enforcement as oppression, and keep the conversation anchored in emotional caricatures rather than practical solutions. It's how the Marxist grievance playbook plays out. It's the same ideological reflex that you see nowadays in academia, in the activist media, and in Hollywood, manufacturing villains to avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that Democrat policies often enable the very exploitation they claim to so bravely fight against. And look, if you have any shred of doubt of the cause and effect of Democrat policies, all you have to do is look at California. There are examples sprinkled all over our state. One great example is this recent homeless situation unfolding in our state. You're not going to believe this.
Trash strewn out for blocks along San Gabriel Boulevard. According to people who live nearby, this homeless encampment shrinks and grows, but never goes away. It's located just south of the 60 freeway and near the shops at Montebello.
The only thing I would be concerned about would be, in the past, we've had fires come about and then our homes are put in danger.
The area is part of Supervisor Hilda Solis's district, and her office told us the jurisdiction actually belongs to the Army Corps of Engineers. Her office told us, despite multiple fires and the area used repeatedly as a refuge for people experiencing homelessness, the Army Corps of Engineers was not able to proactively respond to residents' requests for assistance. Solis's office adds that back in June, approximately 22 people were moved into shelters. They're now waiting for the Corps of Engineers to remove the debris. They say the area has been designated a very high fire hazard severity zone, and the county is trying to figure out how to get money to keep it clear of encampments. Residents say all that means is They're still waiting.
Absolutely unbelievable. The LA County Board of Supervisors, folks, is one of the most well-funded local bodies in America when it comes to fixing homelessness, rubber stamping hundreds of millions for politically connected NGOs like Shangri-La Industries, and funneling even more through government agencies like LASA, which then conveniently award contracts to the same circle of service providers, in some cases even family members of the very people approving the disbursements. These entities burn through cash while delivering little measurable change. Yet, when a homeless encampment sits for years in a designated high fire hazard zone after multiple fires and repeated public safety threats, the response from Supervisor Hilda Solis is to point at the Army Corps of Engineers and shrug. This is the core failure of California's homelessness industrial complex, folks. Endless funding pipelines for unelected bureaucrats and nonprofits, but no accountability when it comes to urgent, tangible hazards. Politically, the incentives are upside down. There's more career capital in being seen as compassionate than in actually solving problems that pit public safety against ideological dogma. And culturally, it's the same paralysis we've seen in Democrat governance nationwide. A preference for symbolic gestures over direct action, even when the cost is measured in destroyed property, burned communities, and eroded trust in local institutions. Needless to say, folks, this is a disaster waiting to happen in a state that is constantly on fire, like, for example, the Canyon Fire currently unfolding, which has exploded to nearly 5,000 acres overnight with zero containment. Structures are literally blowing apart as flames rip through Ventura and Los Angeles counties. And yet California's leadership treats fire season like it's some kind of unpredictable surprise. Oh my God, it's happening again. In a state that should be the world's expert on wildfire prevention, we're left watching another preventable inferno turn homes to ash while officials focus on press conferences instead of preparedness.
We are following that breaking news. That fast-moving canyon fire near Lake Piru is forcing families to evacuate as triple-digit heat fuels those flames.
Look at the cow there. Oh, you think of the wildlife, the animals. Right here, though, is a live look at that fire from Sky Fox as it's starting to get dark out there. You can see that ring of flames around that mountain range there and that smoke. This started this afternoon. It's been going all night. They have been fighting this from the air with a lot of air support and people there on the ground as well.
And so here we are experiencing another natural disaster in California. And where is Greasy Gavin? Nowhere near the flames, of course, but front and center in his favorite role, political showman. See, while the Canyon Fire tears through thousands of acres and fire crews struggle to contain it, Gavin's too busy posturing for the cameras and picking fights with the federal government. It's the same tired script every single year. Neglect prevention, watch the state burn, then blame everybody else while pretending it's all part of some grand plan. Sure, Gavin, sure.
California is moving forward as a state that's larger than 21 state populations combined. We are not a small, isolated state. State larger than 21 populations combined. We tried to play by a higher set of standards and rules with our independent redistricting, and we believe in that. And we are not talking about eliminating that commission.
Bro, you're obsessed,
We're talking about emergency measures to respond to what's happening in Texas, and we will nullify what happens in Texas. We will pick up 5 seats with the consent of the people, and that's the difference between
this isn't consent of the people
and the approach they're taking.
Greasy Gavin's at it again, folks, thinking he's actually speaking to most reasonable Americans and not just pandering to his hyper-partisan Democrat base. Americans see right through this, folks. The man who claims California has been playing by the higher set of standards is now openly admitting he wants to manipulate the system to wipe out half the state's remaining Republican seats, not by winning the argument, but by basically redrawing the map. This isn't about consent of the people, as he's trying to frame it. It's about engineering the electorate to guarantee one-party rule in this state. And as some petty attempt at retribution because Texas dared to consider redistricting. And to be clear, folks, California already has 43 Democrat seats out of the 52, despite Republicans earning nearly 40% of the vote. And yet, that lopsided advantage still isn't enough for Gavin. This is basically the quiet part out loud, what he's saying. When Democrats talk about protecting democracy, they mean protecting their own power, even if it means bending or rewriting the rules or completely misframing what they're doing once they see what they actually want to do, which is just hold on to power. And bear in mind, folks, that this is the same Gavin that's currently being exposed left and right for the most insane levels of corruption. And here's one of the biggest and most disturbing allegations making the rounds. The first centers on his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and a financial pipeline that critics say amounts to funneling taxpayer dollars into the Newsom family's own pockets, allegedly. His wife, Jennifer, is a filmmaker and gender equity advocate who founded a nonprofit called The Representation Project in 2011. On paper, it's a 501c3 focused on producing educational films and curricula to promote gender justice in schools. In reality, according to IRS Form 990 filings and multiple investigative reports, it's also a lucrative customer for Jennifer's own for-profit production company, Girls Club Entertainment, LLC. This is where the conflict of interest accusations explode. Here's how the arrangement works. California taxpayer dollars, often in the form of grants and school district budgets, flow into the Representation Project. The nonprofit then pays Jennifer Siebel Newsom a salary of roughly $150,000 per year. But that's not all, folks. It also contracts Girls Club Entertainment to produce and license all of its films. Since 2012, the Representation Project has paid over $1.6 million to Girls Club, disclosed in IRS filings as related party transactions because Jennifer controls both entities. These payments have included an ongoing $150,000 annual contracting fee since 2018. Further, the films themselves are licensed to public schools at an average of $270 per license, covering documentaries and gender equity curricula over 5,000 schools nationwide, including many in California, have purchased these materials, generating roughly $1.4 million in licensing revenue for the nonprofit. But since Jennifer's for-profit company produces the films, every sale benefits her twice. Once through the nonprofit's income and again through the for-profit's contracted fees. Now, when you do the math, folks, the Newsom family's benefit is substantial, roughly $1.5 million from Jennifer's nonprofit salary over the years, plus an estimated $1.7 million from the Girls Club film sales and licensing contracts. All told, that's about $3.2 million directly tied to a structure where taxpayer-funded schools pay a taxpayer-funded nonprofit, which in turn pays the governor's wife for a profit company. Critics say this is a textbook example of political self-dealing, money entering the system as public good funding, only to be redirected through a loop of nonprofits, contracts, and licensing back into the family business. Supporters argue that the arrangement is legal and transparent because it's disclosed in public filings, but disclosure doesn't erase the ethical red flags. The optics are damning. A sitting governor's household benefiting financially from programs funded by the very government he runs. And bear in mind, folks, this is the same Gavin whose policies increasingly mirror the ideological work of his wife, so it's worth asking whether it's genuine conviction or just convenient opportunism from both of them. That said, let's consider the sweeping laws Gavin has signed in recent years. Assembly Bill 1955, the so-called Safety Act, which bars schools from requiring staff to notify parents when a student changes their gender identity or pronouns, shields educators from retaliation over such decisions, and mandates new LGBTQ plus resources, funny enough, in schools, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. He also signed AB 1084, mandating gender-neutral toy sections in department stores, according to California legislative records, and backed aggressive LGBTQ plus protections, including sanctuary status for trans youth, curriculum laws banning outing students, protections against bias in law enforcement, and gender-inclusive restroom mandates, according to multiple state house reports. In case you're paying attention, folks, these initiatives from Gavin align almost perfectly, actually pretty much perfectly, with Jennifer's nonprofit agenda, the Representation Project, which promotes gender justice through films and education curricula that are increasingly adopted in schools and funded with taxpayer dollars. The Representation Project often licenses content to K-12 districts, which then pays fees that ultimately flow back to Jennifer through her for-profit company, Girls Club Entertainment, according to, as we discussed earlier, IRS Form 990 filings and nonprofit watchdog investigations. So here's a broader picture. Gavin signs legislation that expands the ideological reach of his wife's nonprofit, laws that require or encourage schools to adopt gender equity content, and taxpayer dollars follow into that nonprofit and ultimately into the Newsom family's coffers via related party contracts. It's an apparent alignment of governance and personal gain disguised as progressive leadership that isn't necessarily the result of kindness. It looks like a political synergy where public policy creates a private enterprise controlled by the governor's spouse. Whether it's technically illegal or merely unethical, it certainly smells like influence engineered to generate massive amounts of income, and kind of explains how the governor has been able to afford 3 multi-million-dollar mansions in the last 5 years alone. So it's safe to assume that Gavin isn't just pushing progressive policy out of conviction, he's advancing laws that directly enrich his own household. Under California law and federal statutes, corruption includes using public office for personal or familial gain, and the overlap between Newsom's agenda and his wife's business is impossible to ignore. She runs the Representation Project. She runs that nonprofit. She's the one literally licensing gender justice films and curricula to schools, and also the company that produces all the content, while he's signing all these bills to expand this ideology further into schools, in essence creating the marketplace for his wife's business in these schools. As a result, since 2012, the Newsoms have allegedly pocketed millions through this convenient loop. Disclosing it in IRS filings doesn't erase the conflict. Newsom is creating the market for his wife to profit from this. I keep repeating myself, folks, because I feel like I have to drive the point home. This isn't altruism. It's the governor using the power of his office to build a taxpayer-funded revenue stream for his family. They stake the edge of legality, but by any common sense definition, it's corruption, clear and simple. Public trust traded for private gain. And let's not forget, folks, Gavin's ambitions for the presidency of this country aren't exactly a secret, and that's what makes these allegations even more dangerous. If this is how he operates as governor of the largest state in the union, the 4th largest economy in the world, blurring the line between public service and personal enrichment, imagine the scale of influence peddling he could engineer from the Oval Office. It would make Joe Biden and Hunter Biden look like 2 big con artists, which they actually are. Anyway, we're talking about a man who's already shown he's willing to shape legislation in ways that feed money back into his own pockets, all while cloaking it in the language of equity and justice. In the White House, that model could be deployed on a international level with federal agencies, grants, and policy mandates creating lucrative pipelines for allies, donors, and family. The presidency demands trust, transparency, and loyalty to the public good. People have died for the sanctity of that office. The current president got shot in the ear on the way into taking back this office. It's never been more evident that Gavin is completely incompatible with the office of the presidency. And electing him into that office could very well constitute a national security risk. So the question isn't just whether Gavin is corrupt, it's whether we've grown so numb to political self-dealing that we no longer recognize it when it's right before our eyes. How many times have we been told that these power plays are for the greater good, only to watch the same names profit from the fallout? And if this is what passes as leadership in one of the most powerful states in the country, what does that say about the health of our constitutional republic, or about us as voters? Maybe the real test isn't whether politicians can spin a story, but whether we're still willing to question it. Because if we stop asking who benefits, if we stop following the money, we're not just tolerating corruption, we're inviting it in. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.